So your vocab notebook should be open to a clean page. You should already have been starting your vocab title, because other than the chapter title, you know exactly how to set it up. Draw a squiggly line underneath the last number from the last word from number 9. And we are starting Phantom Tollbooth, TPT, chapter 10. A colorful symphony. And then underline the title of the notes, and then write today's date, March 10th, 2021. Yes?
What number are we starting on? Because when you were gone, we got so confused.
Count back. So look at the last number you do have, and then number the rest. Because I took out some numbers. I took out some vocab that's on this list. And what number are we starting on?
36.
36, yes, that matches what I have. So number 36. Number 36 is the word mirage, not mirage or mirage, mirage. M-I-R-A-G-E, mirage. M-I-R-A-G-E. You've probably heard this word before. Yes?
I'm going to tell, but I got it on 39 because...
Yeah, the sub probably said the wrong number because I didn't include some of these words. So the number on my sheet is actually different because I took out 3 words. So it should be number 36. Number 36, mirage. You've all probably heard this word before. You all probably know what it is. It is a noun. It's a thing. And it is something that is seen but isn't really there. So a mirage, M-I-R-A-G-E, is something that is seen but isn't really there. Mason, can you see if I stand right here? Okay. It's like if you've ever read a book or seen a TV show or a movie where somebody's like stuck in the desert. They always see a mirage of like water and palm trees. And then they get to it and they realize it's not really there. That's the mirage. Also, when you're driving on like the interstate and you can see really far ahead, sometimes it looks like there's water in the road way up ahead. But then you get there and it's not there. That's a mirage. It's caused by like the sun reflecting off of things that makes it look like water. So you've all seen mirages. You've all probably heard them in books or TV shows or movies when somebody's stuck in the desert. That is a mirage. Number 37 is the word inquire. Inquire. I-N-Q-U-I-R-E. Inquire. I-N-Q-U-I-R-E. Inquire. It is a verb. It's an action. And it means to ask. That's all it means. So if you're writing a story and you want to think of a more interesting way to say ask, you can say inquire. They are synonyms. So instead of saying she asked what time the movie started, you can say she inquired about the movie start time. And which one sounds more interesting? Inquired. Okay, number 38 is vanish. We've all heard this word before. We all know what it means. Vanish, V-A-N-I-S-H, bless you. V-A-N-I-S-H, bless you, What part of speech do you think it is? Lena?
Verb.
Verb. It is. It is a verb. It's an action. And it means to disappear. So what happens to mirages as you get closer to them? Michaela? They vanish. Very good. Vanish. V-A-N-I-S-H. It's a verb. That means to disappear. Number 39 is the word luminous. Luminous. L-U-M-I-N-O-U-S. Luminous. L-U-M-I-N-O-U-S. Yes.
Are these all Victoria's words?
Yes. And then I'll get volunteers to do the words for chapters 8 and 9.
Can I do it in this pen?
No, it needs to be pencil and then flare, because that's what's going to look the best on the board. Luminous. L-U-M-I-N-O-U-S. It is an adjective. That means it describes a noun. And it means something gives off light or is glowing. So if something is luminous, it is glowing. If I stand here, can you see the whole thing? Okay, cool. So this will be my standing spot, because then I'm not in anybody's way. Luminous, L-U-M-I-N-O-U-S, is an adjective. It's a describing word. It describes a noun as something that gives off light or is glowing. Yes?
It's just when you're standing there, I can't really see like the
Can you see the number? Okay, so you can see where my hand is right now? Okay, cool. Good. I think we have one more word. Yes.
So, when light is bouncing off a mirror, is that luminous?
Not really, because it just means the object itself is giving off light. So you could describe a flashlight as luminous. You could describe a, like if you have, like glow stars that you can put on your ceiling, those would be luminous. Sometimes there are places where there are like fish and mushrooms that give off light. Those would be luminous. Yes.
Are LED lights luminous?
Technically. If it gives off light, it is luminous. Okay, last word, number 40. This is a long one, so make sure you spell it right. Emphatically. Emphatically. E-M-P-H-A-T-I-C-A-L-L-Y. Emphatically. E-M-P-H-A-T-I-C-A-L-L-Y. Emphatically. It ends in L-Y. Who thinks they know what part of speech it could possibly be? What parts of speech usually end in L-Y? Kingston?
I was gonna say adjective.
Not adjective.
Adverb.
Adverb. Most adverbs end in ly. Because adverbs, not all the time, but a lot of times, are adjectives with the suffix ly. The suffix ly turns an adjective into an adverb. Bless you. So, remember, adverbs describe verbs. So it describes an action. It describes how something was done. So emphatically means that something is done with great expression or excitement. So emphatically, emphatically is an adverb. That means it describes a verb. And it means that something is done with great expression or excitement. So sometimes when we're doing math and I get real loud, I'm teaching it emphatically because I'm getting excited or I'm using great expression. Yes?
Why are you getting excited?
I don't know. Because you guys are understanding or something like that. Yes, Mason?
How do you spell expression?
Expression is spelled EXPRESSION. Any other words need spelled? Okay, once you've got that, you've copied it all down, it is all written correctly, you may put your vocab notebook away and get in your good listening position. Please get into your good listening position quickly so that we have time to read the chapter and answer the questions. Okay, your book should be open to page 109. Make sure you're listening closely and using your finger to follow along. Chapter 10, A Colorful Symphony. As they ran, tall trees closed in around them and arched gracefully toward the sky. The late afternoon sunlight leapt lightly from leaf to leaf, slid along branches and down trunks, and dropped finally to the ground in warm, luminous patches. A soft glow filled the air with a kind of light that made everything look sharp and clear and close enough to reach out and touch. Alec raced ahead, laughing and shouting, but soon encountered serious difficulties. For while he could always see the tree behind the next one, he could never see the next one itself, and was continually crashing into it. After several minutes of wildly dashing about, they all stopped for a breath of air. "I think we're lost," panted the humbug, collapsing into a large berry bush. "Nonsense!" shouted Alec from the high branch on which he sat. "Do you know where we are?" asked Milo. "Certainly," he replied. "We're right here on this very spot. Besides, being lost is never a matter of not knowing where you are. It's a matter of not knowing where you aren't. And I don't care at all about where I'm not." This was much too complicated for the bug to figure out, and Milo had just begun repeating it to himself when Alec said, "If you don't believe me, ask the giant." And he pointed to a small house tucked neatly between two of the largest trees. Milo and Talk walked up to the door, whose brass nameplate read simply, "The Giant," and knocked. "Good afternoon," said the perfectly ordinary-sized man who answered the door. "Are you the giant?" asked Talk doubtfully. "To be sure," he replied proudly. "I'm the smallest giant in the world. What can I do for you?" "Are we lost?" said Milo. "That's a difficult question," said the giant. "Why don't you go around back and ask the midget?" And he closed the door. They walked to the rear of the house, which looked exactly like the front, and knocked at the door, whose nameplate read, "The Midget." "How are you?" inquired the man, who looked exactly like the giant. "Are you the midget?" asked Talk again, with a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Unquestionably," he answered. "I'm the tallest midget in the world. May I help you?" "Do you think we're lost?" repeated Milo. "That's a very complicated problem," he said. "Why don't you go around to the side and ask the fat man?" And he too quickly disappeared. The side of the house looked very like the front and back, and the door flew open the very instant they knocked. "How nice of you to come by," explained the man. who could have been the midget's twin brother. "You must be the fat man," said Talk, learning not to count too much on appearance. "The thinnest one in the world," he replied brightly. "But if you have any questions, I suggest you try the thin man on the other side of the house." Just as they suspected, the other side of the house looked the same as the front, the back, and the side, and the door was again answered by a man who looked precisely like the other three. "What a pleasant surprise!" he cried happily. "I haven't had a visitor in as long as I can remember." "How long is that?" asked Milo. "I'm sure I don't know," he replied. "Now, pardon me, I have to answer the door." "But you just did," said Talk. "Oh, yes, I'd forgotten." "Are you the fattest thin man in the world?" asked Talk. "Do you know one that's fatter?" he asked impatiently. "I think you're all the same man," said Milo emphatically. "Shh!" he cautioned, putting his finger up to his lips and drawing Milo closer. "Do you want to ruin everything? You see, to tall men I'm a midget, and to short men I'm a giant. To the skinny ones, I'm a fat man, and to the fat ones, I'm a thin man. That way I can hold 4 jobs at once. As you can see, though, I'm neither tall, nor short, nor fat, nor thin. In fact, I'm quite ordinary. But there are so many ordinary men that no one asks their opinion about anything. Now, what is your question?" "Are we lost?" asked Milo once again. Said the man, scratching his head. "I haven't had such a difficult question in as long as I can remember. Would you mind repeating it? It slipped my mind." Milo asked the question again. My, the man mumbled. "I know one thing for certain. It's much harder to tell whether you are lost than whether you were lost. For, on many occasions, where you're going is exactly where you are. On the other hand, you often find that where you've been is not at all where you should have gone. And since it's much more difficult to find your way back from some place you've never left, I suggest you go there immediately, and then decide. If you have any more questions, please ask the giant." And he slammed his door and pulled down the shade. "I hope you're satisfied," said Alec when they'd returned from the house. And he bounced to his feet, bent down to awaken the snoring humbug, and started off, more slowly this time, in the direction of a large clearing. "Do many people live here in the forest?" asked Milo as they trotted along together. "Oh, yes, they live in a wonderful city called Reality," he announced, smashing into one of the smaller trees and sending a cascade of nuts and leaves to the ground. "It's right this way." In a few more steps, the forest opened before them, and off to the left, a magnificent metropolis appeared. The rooftops shone like mirrors. The walls glistened with thousands of precious stones, and the broad avenues were paved in silver. "Is that it?" shouted Milo, running toward the shining streets. "Oh no, that's only illusions," said Alec. "The real city is over there." "What are illusions?" Milo asked, for it was the loveliest city he'd ever seen. "Illusions," explained Alec, "are like mirages." And realizing that this didn't help much, he continued, "And mirages are things that aren't really there, that you can see very clearly." "How can you see something that isn't there?" yawned the humbug, who wasn't fully awake yet. "Sometimes it's much simpler than seeing things that are," he said. "For instance, if something is there, you can only see it with your eyes open. But if it isn't there, you can see it just as well with your eyes closed." What's the problem, Cully? Are you okay? Okay, why are you making that face? Why are you making that face? Okay. "That's why imaginary things are often easier to see than real ones." "Then where is reality?" barked Talk. "Right here," cried Alec, waving his arms. "You're standing in the middle of Main Street." They looked around very carefully. Talk sniffed suspiciously at the wind, and the humbug gingerly stabbed his cane in the air. But there was nothing at all to see. "It's really a very pleasant city," said Alec as he strolled down the street, pointing out several of the sights, which didn't seem to be there, and tipping his cap to the passers-by. There were great crowds of people rushing along with their heads down, and they all appeared to know exactly where they were going as they darted down and around the non-existent streets and in and out of the missing buildings. "I don't see any city," said Milo very softly. "Neither do they," Alec remarked sadly, "but it hardly matters, for they don't miss it at all." "It must be very difficult to live in a city you can't see," Milo insisted, jumping aside as a line of cars and trucks went by. "Not at all once you get used to it," said Alec, "but let me tell you how it happened." And as they strolled along the bustling and busy avenue, he began. "Many years ago, on this very spot, there was a beautiful city of fine houses and inviting spaces, and no one who lived here was ever in a hurry. The streets were full of wonderful things to see, and the people would often stop to look at them." "Didn't they have any place to go?" asked Milo. "To be sure," continued Alec. "But as you know, the most important reason for going from one place to another is to see what's in between. And they took great pleasure in doing just that. Then, one day, someone discovered that if you walked as fast as possible and looked at nothing but your shoes, you would arrive at your destination much more quickly. Soon, everyone was doing it. They all rushed down the avenues and hurried along the boulevards, seeing nothing of the wonders and beauties of their city as they went." Milo remembered the many times he'd done the very same thing, and as hard as he tried, there were even things on his own street that he couldn't remember. No one paid any attention to how things looked, and as they moved faster and faster, everything grew uglier and dirtier. And as everything grew uglier and dirtier, they moved faster and faster. And at last, a very strange thing began to happen. Because nobody cared, the city slowly began to disappear. Day by day, the buildings grew fainter and fainter, and the streets faded away until at last it was entirely invisible. There was nothing to see at all. "What did they do?" the humbug inquired, suddenly taking an interest in things. "Nothing at all," continued Alec. "They went right on living here just as they'd always done, in the houses they could no longer see, and on the streets which had vanished, because nobody had noticed a thing. And that's the way they have lived to this very day." "Hasn't anyone told them?" asked Milo. "It doesn't do any good," Alec replied, "for they can never see what they're in too much of a hurry to look for." "Why don't they live in illusions?" suggested the humbug. "It's much prettier." "Many of them do," he answered, walking in the direction of the forest once again. "But it's just as bad to live in a place where what you do see isn't there as it is to live in one where what you don't see is." "Perhaps someday you can have one city as easy to see as illusions and as hard to forget as reality," Milo remarked. "That will happen only when you bring back rhyme and reason," said Alec, smiling, for he had seen right through Milo's plans. "Now, let's hurry or we'll miss the evening concert." So you may be thinking, this is so confusing, what's happening? Well, it's confusing to Milo too. Why is everything so confusing? What did Alec just say? He just told us why everything is so confusing. Why is everything in the lands beyond so confusing? Victoria.
It's because rhyme and reason are gone.
Because rhyme and reason are gone. And there's an idiom that says there's no rhyme or reason to it. That idiom means something doesn't make sense. So, if I teach you about patterns and your homework is all about, if I teach you about patterns in math and your math homework is all about linking verbs, does that make sense? There's no rhyme or reason to it. So, there's no rhyme or reason in the lands beyond. But they're literal people, so nothing makes sense. Okay, focus. We're going back to the story. Carla, here, not back there. They followed him quickly up a flight of steps which couldn't be seen and through a door which didn't exist. In a moment, they had left reality, which is sometimes a hard thing to tell, and stood in a completely different part of the forest. The sun was dropping slowly from sight, and stripes of purple and orange and crimson and gold piled themselves on top of the distant hills. The last shafts of light waited patiently for a flight of wrens to find their way home, and a group of anxious stars had already taken their places. "Here we are," cried Alec, and with a sweep of his arm, he pointed towards an enormous symphony orchestra. "Isn't it a grand sight?" "There were at least 1,000 musicians, Carla." "We're here, not back there." "Here we are." There were at least 1,000 musicians ranged in a great arc before them. To the left and right were the violins and cellos, whose bows moved in great waves. And behind them, in numberless profusion, Carla, please don't make me interrupt everybody else to call your name again. Don't worry about what's going on back there. You need to focus on this book so that you can do your journal. And behind them, in numberless profusion, the piccolos, flutes, clarinets, oboes, bassoons, horns, trumpets, trombones, and tubas were all playing at once. At the very rear, so far away that they could hardly be seen, were the percussion instruments. And lastly, in a long line up one side of a steep slope, were the solemn bass fiddles. Carla, put it away. I don't know why you have a remote in your hand. On a high podium in front stood the conductor, a tall, gaunt man with dark, deep-set eyes and a thin mouth placed carelessly between his long, pointed nose and his long, pointed chin. He used no baton, but conducted with large, sweeping movements, which seemed to start at his toes and work slowly up through his body and along his slender arms, and end finally at the tips of his graceful fingers. "I don't hear any music," said Milo. "That's right," said Alec. "You don't listen to this concert, you watch it. Now pay attention." As the conductor waved his arms, he molded the air like handfuls of soft clay, and the musicians carefully followed his every direction. "Carla, your eyes should be on your book. Put those headphones on." "What are they playing?" asked Talk, looking up inquisitively at Alec. "The sunset, of course. They play it every evening about this time." "They do?" said Milo quizzically. "Naturally," answered Alec. "And they also play morning, noon, and night, when of course it's morning, noon, or night. Why, there wouldn't be any color in the world unless they played it. Each instrument plays a different one," he explained. "And depending, of course, on what season it is and how the weather's to be, the conductor chooses his score and directs the day. But watch, the sun has almost set, and in a moment you can ask Chroma himself." The last colors slowly faded from the western sky, and as they did, one by one, the instruments stopped, until only the bass fiddles, in their somber, slow movement, were left to play the night, and a single set of silver bells brightened the constellations. The conductor let his arms fall limply at his sides and stood quite still as darkness claimed the forest. "That was a very beautiful sunset," said Milo, walking to the podium. "It should be," was the reply. "We've been practicing since the world began." And reaching down, the speaker picked Milo off the ground and set him on the music stand. "I am Chroma the Great," he continued, gesturing broadly with his hands, "conductor of color, maestro of pigment, and director of the entire spectrum." "Do you play all day long?" asked Milo when he had introduced himself. "Ah, yes, all day, every day," he sang out, then pirouetted gracefully around the platform. "I rest only at night, and even then, they play on." "What would happen if you stopped?" asked Milo, who didn't quite believe that color happened that way. "See for yourself," roared Chroma, and he raised both hands high over his head. Immediately, the instruments that were playing stopped, and all at once, all color vanished. The world looked like an enormous coloring book that had never been used. Everything appeared in simple black outlines, and it looked as if someone with a set of paints the size of a house and a brush as wide could stay happily occupied for years. Then Chroma lowered his arms. The instruments began again, and the color returned. Mason made an observation. I saw him. What was the observation you made, Mason?
Daily quick rate.
Our daily quick rate. What is the daily quick rate about?
Imagine if the world has no color in it. It is just black and white like an unused coloring book.
There you go. So your daily your daily quick rate was to imagine this world that Chroma just created by he put his arms up in the air, and they all stopped. And there we've got our empty coloring book world. Okay. Now let's go back to the story. "You see what a dull place the world would be without color," he said, bowing until his chin almost touched the ground. "But what pleasure to lead my violins in a serenade of spring green, or hear my trumpets blare out the blue sea, and then watch the oboes tint it all in warm yellow sunshine. And rainbows are best of all, and blazing neon signs, and taxicabs with stripes, and the soft, muted tones of a foggy day. We play them all." As Chroma spoke, Milo sat with his eyes open wide, and Alec, Talk, and the Humbug looked on in wonder. "Now I really must get some sleep," Chroma yawned. "We've had lightning, fireworks, and parades for the last few nights, and I've had to be up to conduct them. But tonight is sure to be quiet." Then, putting his large hand on Milo's shoulder, he said, "Be a good fellow and watch my orchestra till morning, will you? And be sure to wake me at 5:23 for the sunrise. Good night, good night, good night." With that, he leapt lightly from this podium, and in 3 long steps vanished into the forest. "That's a good idea," said Talk, making himself comfortable in the grass as the bug grumbled himself quickly to sleep, and Alex stretched out in midair. And Milo, full of thoughts and questions, curled up on the pages of tomorrow's music and eagerly awaited the dawn. Okay, go ahead and Aaron, whose journals are on the top? Girls at home, go ahead and get on. You don't have the title written yet. Close your journal and finish it later. Okay, number 1. What is the giant secret? You're just answering that question. The giant secret is blank. That one may be able to be answered in 1 sentence. That means I expect 3 if you do this one. 3 completed answers if you do number 1, because you can pretty much answer it in 1 sentence. Number 2, summarize the story of illusions and reality. So in your own words, you're telling that story that Alec told about those 2 cities. The city of illusions, the city of reality. Number 3, draw a detailed picture of how you imagine illusions and reality. That means you're going to have 2 little pictures. Here's illusions, here's reality. Answer 2 other questions before you do number 3, okay? Any 2, but just do number 3 as a 3rd question, okay? Because I don't want you to spend the whole 15 minutes drawing a picture, okay? Number 4, describe Chroma's job. There's the first part. In your own words, you need to write what is Chroma's job is blank. What happened when he lifted both of his arms over his head? That's the second part. Make sure you're detailed. Make sure you're using your own words. Number 5, put the following events in order. Alec tells the story of illusions and reality. Chroma demonstrates what would happen if the orchestra stopped playing. Milo meets the giant. Milo falls asleep on tomorrow's music. And Milo watches Chroma conduct the sunset. Now I noticed a couple of you just put like numbers. You put like 1, 2, or 2, 4, 5, 6. Carla, listen. I'm tired of calling your name, because you're not listening and you're going to be the one to do this. You are not allowed to just put, okay, 2 happens first, 5 happens second, so 2, 5, 1, 3, 4. You are not allowed to do that. You must write 5, put the following events in order, and then write out the whole sentence in the correct order. You don't have to write this and then rewrite all the sentences in order. Write 5, put the following events in order, and then write, okay, here's the thing that happens first. Write the whole sentence. Here's the thing that happens second. Write the whole sentence. Here's the thing that happens third. Write the whole sentence, and so on. Don't just tell me numbers. These aren't numbered. I'm not going to go back and figure out what's number 2, what's number 3. I'm looking for the sentences so that I know, okay, yes, I know what this happened. I don't know what you mean by 1, 2, 3. I'm not going to go back and look at this when I grade to see what number 1 was. But I know the sentences in the correct order. Okay? Yes, Victoria, quickly.
But we can write down those and then write a number beside.
Yes, you can write these in that order and then put like 1, 4, 5, whatever. You can do that, but I need the sentences written out. Either in the correct order or in this order with the numbers that it happened, the order it happens to the side. Okay? Do you understand what I mean by that? So you have these sentences written by here, but you're like, okay, this happened first, so here's number 1. This happened second, so here's number 2. This happened third, so here's number 3, and so on. Okay? Any questions about the questions? Quickly.
So you want us to go to 1? So you want us to go to help? So you want us
You get to choose. You either get to rewrite these in the proper order, or you write them exactly as they look up here, and you put the number that it happens into the side. Okay. Any other questions about the questions? Make sure that you are being detailed. Just like one word, well, that's not correct because that's not a complete sentence, but also it doesn't tell me that you know what happens in the story. The point of you answering these questions is to show me that you know what's going on. Otherwise, it's just going to get more and more and more and more confusing, and none of it's going to make sense, and it will have been pointless to do any of this story. Okay? If you don't understand what's happening, it's pointless to read the book. It's like wasting a bunch of time that we could be doing textbook work. So, show me that you know what's happening by having good, well-written, well-thought-out, detailed answers. Remember, write the number and the question, skip a line, write the answer. Skip a line, write the next number and the question, skip a line, write the answer. You must answer 2 questions before you do number 3. It can be any of those other questions. Just answer 2 full questions before you do number 3. That can include number 1. But if you have number 1, I expect 3 answers because number 1 can be answered in like a minute, if even. Okay, when I say go ahead and start answering. If you have not finished the title, you need to write the title. Oops, that's the calculator. You will have 15 minutes. Go. Make sure you're spending the whole time writing and thinking. If you have questions, you may come and ask me.